Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel, Just Draw Something, where we learn to draw together. Alright, today we will be doing part 2 of drawing my original character, Primera. So today we will go over inking and the process I use to sort of outline my characters. Now, my inking isn't just like the total end-all be-all. You probably have your own inking style, but this is the inking style that I use to sort of just make sure my drawings look good in the inking phase. So we're going to go ahead and see that today. Alright guys, let's go ahead and get started. I am going to use my iPad Pro. I will be drawing with Procreate. Procreate is not needed. If you draw with a pencil, make sure to sketch lightly so that way you can erase any guidelines or mistakes you may make. Also, you can use Paint-Tool-Sci, Photoshop, Clip Art Studio, whatever you got. Alright guys, let's go ahead and start. Alright, so I am going to go ahead and prep my canvas for inking. Now, I don't know if everybody calls my personal choice of inking style inking per se, because I like to keep my lines very sketchy. I feel they add more character and more depth to my overall drawing. So I am just going to keep on inking with my personal inking style, which a lot of people I feel don't define it as an inking style just because it is so sketchy. But I find that the inking layer is probably one of the most important layers in your drawings. I only say this is because it gives you a guide or a map or whatever you want to call it of where to lay down your colors. I find the more sloppy or the more sketchy your ink layer becomes, or any layer when you're trying to finish your work, there's sort of an unknown factor. That's why I love the ink layer, because I get to define all of these unknowns and really just set them in stone on what I am going to do in the final picture. Now, don't forget that when you start inking, you don't want to stop inking after you take off your initial layer. So if you're trying to look at how does your ink lines look before it's even finished, I find this to be a huge mistake because the inking is not yet detailed. So you're just getting your straight lines. I do know some people who do their inking details while they're doing their inking, but I am not one of them. I usually will do just sort of like a very generic inking job, and then I will go ahead and add all the details and all the line weights after I am done inking. Everybody has sort of their own process. This is the way my workflow works, and I am fine with that. I constantly watch other people's workflow when they're doing like a speed paint, or they're doing, just a regular real-time drawing, and I find that everybody is different. Some people only use a general outline sketch and they don't use inking at all, which is a style that I am trying to get into myself. But like I said before, for this project, we will just be doing a regular inking process and a regular coloring process. Now, there are some rules that I follow when I do my own personal inking, and that is I just make sure the outer lines of objects are thicker while the inline details are a lot thinner. So I might draw the outline of the hair thicker, and then I might draw the strands in it a lot thinner. But then something like the jacket, which sits on top of everything, or the scarf that sits on everything, I'll draw those in a much heavier ink than I draw all of the hair with. So as you can see, I'm just going in with a really thick ink on some of the stuff that I feel needs to be pronounced or the center of attention in the drawing, and just making sure those really stand out in comparison to the rest of the drawing. I don't know if it's just me, but I find when my hands are not defined in my sketch layer that I have the worst time inking them because I have to fix them. I would say a general rule of thumb for most people, just make sure that you get your hands done in your sketch layer. I see so many artists get very frustrated that they didn't do this step on anything, because a shirt is easier to fix than a set of hands, and I feel like a hair is probably easier to fix than hands as well. So I would just say get those hands out of the way and make sure that they are really good for your sketch layer, so when it comes to inking, you don't have to change it that much. When I do inking, I tend to change the hair pretty drastically, or sometimes I don't, but the hair tends to be something that's changed so drastically in the inking process that sometimes it doesn't even look like the same sketch picture. So just remember that your sketch picture is a guide and you shouldn't just follow it. You should, if you see any room for improvements, just start adding stuff that you think might be cool and see if you like the change. Except for the hands. Don't do this to the hands. So, like I said before, I usually draw a very generic ink layer, and then I start thickening lines where I think there will be either shadows or where I think objects should be more pronounced. My general rule of thumb is I just outline things a little thicker as they are laying on something. So like her scarf thing or muffler, it's laying over her chest, so I might draw that underline a little thicker. The same thing for her jacket, it's laying over her upper rib area, so I will go ahead and make that line a little thicker. Same thing for the hand, because I really want the hand to be a little more pronounced. Now, you see me keep on doing the sketch layer. Well, I also pre-planned like where I kind of want the thickness and thinness to go. So I just make sure to kind of follow that guide, but not completely. Also, when I am inking, I make sure to change my opacity down, because I like line buildup. I don't like when the lines are so bold and black, but I do like the buildups, and I like them to transition to sort of a lower faded opacity. And then I will draw the details in, and those details will be much thinner lines. As you can see, the coat, where it's sort of outlining the coat with a little design, I drew that extremely thin in comparison. I think that this adds a lot of dimension and a lot of character to your work, and I feel like this is where it starts becoming your style. A sketch maybe shows some of your style, but I think inking really defines and shows your style. Just like if you were to paint without ink, those shapes that you draw and the way you draw those shapes really define your style. At this point, I will just keep on defining the lines. That's pretty much all you can do when you're inking and where you think it looks good. Now, I know a lot of other artists will say you need to draw thicker lines where there are shadows, which I kind of do. And then I leave the thinner lines for where the light's hitting it a little more for when I color, so it doesn't look so dramatic. But when I color, I usually color over my lines into a sort of, I don't know, light or darker color of the actual clothes. So if the shirt's gray, then I might draw it in a shade or two darker for the outline by putting that over my ink layer. But we'll get into that when I start coloring. I tend to ramble and get a little off topic because I don't really know how to explain very well. So if anybody has any tips on making better explanations, please feel free to leave that down in the comment. I would like to say in the ink layer in the hair, this is an important part. Like if you want to add blank space for the hair, add blank space now. And that would be like if the hair separates in an area or the little fringes at the end are spiked, you want to go ahead and add those. And in the hair, I usually do keep the lines thin, but where they are connected, so if you see where those like little V tapers are, where you see those dark inks, I will just start adding more of those. I feel it adds dimension to the hair, and it adds sort of like a separation structure that I feel you need in most of your art. And you can find that throughout this whole picture. You'll see that I have done a lot of those little areas where the lines meet. They are a little bit darker than other things. Not only would there be a shadow cast there, it also gives you a great idea of where the hair is going to flow and where you're going to need a shadow for when you color. Now, I do find it important to draw the little details, and it's really important also to make sure that you flash back and forth between your sketch layer and your ink layer to sort of like see where you're going to put these details. Like when I add the seams here, I make sure the one line is thick. So if you look at a seam in most things, you will see that there is a line that is thick, and then there's kind of a line where the cloth meets the folded cloth, where it's the same color, just a little darker. So I make sure to sort of magnify that in my inking process, so that way I know that the one line needs to be dark, and then I need to shade sort of a lighter color for where the light or the sort of wearing out of the color where it fades can be colored correctly. Now, I will say, when you get to the sort of what you want for your ink layer, to start making final adjustments. Now, final adjustments can include what I am doing here, adjusting the eye. I might not like the eye, you might not like the eye, so it's a good choice to use the lasso tool, and make sure to transform it to something that looks good to you. Also, don't be afraid of the transform tool. Digital inking, or not digital inking, but digital drawing is very unnatural. So sometimes your mind might see something different. Maybe you'll find that if you flip your canvas, which I did in the sketch a lot to make sure that everything was balanced, that you might not be quite happy with the way it came out. So I would use the transform tool to sort of like even everything out. Straight on faces are not really my specialty, because symmetry is really hard for me for whatever reason. I am working on that, but 3/4 quarter view angles are probably a lot easier for me, and it seems like a lot of people like drawing those. Don't forget, if you are drawing details, make sure if there is any folds in the clothes, you kind of make up for that. I usually just draw the lines in slight variations, like as you see on the circle, that it's like kind of like a little block circle, and then it breaks, and then another circle, kind of block circle, and then it breaks, and then another circle until it makes a full circle. And then from there, obviously I adjust everything else that I think looks weird through warping and the transformation tools. So don't be afraid to use all the tools in your repertoire to make your picture look as good as it can be. I would say probably do this on some of your practice stuff, like practice warping. So if you're drawing a picture of an anime that you like, go ahead and use that as an underlayer. Draw your sketch layer, see how close you can get to it, and then sort of after you are done making that sketch, just use the transform tool to sort of get it into the position that is as close to your reference picture as possible. This will really help you manage your transformations and make your pictures so much better and much more proportioned. It is a strong tool, and I wish I would have known about it sooner, but I know about it now. So now my pictures can really have that sense of proportion, and I don't have to fix anything else. So that's another great thing, is I don't have to fix anything else. Anyways, the last part of this is just making sure all of it is set, and that is it. Just make sure the adjustments are not completely blown out of proportion. Your mind has a good sense of what looks good and what doesn't look good. So keep that in mind. So here we are at the end of the video. Hopefully you guys learned something new and sort of just kind of followed along with me how I do my inking process. I wanted to mention that the pen that I use for inking is called the Inkbly pen, which is in the inking section of Procreate. Now, I'm not sure what those are in Photoshop or Paint Tool Sci, but I just like using an Inkbly because I kind of like the texture on my line art. All right, guys, feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below. Also, comment what you would like to be drawn, and I will go ahead and learn how to draw it and teach you how I learned how to draw it. Always feel free to leave feedback and critique. And also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications. Have a great day, guys.